1856, Abner Bennett was elected to serve as White River Township treasurer. And this is unusual because at that time, black people could not even vote. And he got elected to a position in the township. So he must have been a pretty well-respected man in his area. He died in 1879, and he is buried in the cemetery in Montague. Now, if you were to go in the back of this house, it is about 50 yards from Lake Michigan. Lake Michigan runs very visibly in the backyard of this house. In fact, the property owner now told me that the house was probably, when it was first built, closer to the water, and it has been moved. For that reason, there's speculation that Abner Bennett himself assisted people coming off the lake in various kinds of vessels who were hiding and coming into the White River area as fugitives. So far, we haven't been able to find the smoking gun. But why he settled there, and the lake is very visible in his backyard, leads us to believe that he might have been one of those people who assisted fugitives who came in on the lake. Again, a working history. We're not, we can't say for sure. Another person who came to this area was a man by the name of Hezekiah Smith. And we get two different places for his birth. In some places we hear that he was born in Virginia, but then in other places we hear that he was born in Ohio. So whenever we get this contradiction, that leads us to believe that perhaps this person was born in slavery and escaped, and he's telling a different story about where he actually was born because he's afraid. He doesn't want people to think that he was born enslaved. He came to Grand Haven around 1845, and he initially worked in Jabez Barber's sawmill in Grand Haven in Ottawa County. In the early records, they don't often say the name of the city. They usually use the name of the county. In 1853, he purchased 10 acres of land in Section 10 in Spring Lake Township. And that was near a body of water. And that body of water was later named Smith's Bayou after Hezekiah Smith. He remained in Grand Haven his entire life. He had several wives, and as late as 1894, there's an article in the Grand Haven Tribune that talks about Hezekiah Smith being a delegate to an equal rights convention in Grand Rapids in 1894. So he was one of the earliest settlers in Ottawa County. Abner Bennett was one of the earliest settlers in Muskegon County, which later became Oceana County, and Hezekiah Smith in Ottawa County. We don't know how they came. We don't know why they came. Why these lake shore counties? The only, one of the clues or hints that we take is that these people were coming here on the lake. Somehow they were using vessels. They were being transported on vessels. How did they know to come to Ottawa County? If he was one of the first, and so far we see that he is the first, Although Bennett was here probably a little earlier, did he know Bennett? You know, those are questions that we still can't really answer. On the same day that Hezekiah Smith bought land in Spring Lake, another African American by the name of William Penn also bought land in Spring Lake in Section 5. Now this comes from the actual plat maps of Spring Lake. Now Penn worked as a cook in the Washington House Hotel in Grand Haven. He eventually owned 80 acres north of Hezekiah Smith's property on Smith's Bayou. So these people are coming and they're purchasing land. What we know about Penn is that he was born either in Virginia or Ohio. Again, we cannot pinpoint these people, and he was born in 1810. So in 1810, from 1810 to 1853, he's about 40-something years old when he comes to Grand Haven. And apparently they come with money, or for example, Hezekiah Smith is working at the sawmill. So he is able to earn money, and perhaps over time enough to buy that section of land in Spring Lake Township. Penn is working at the Washington House Hotel, so he's able to earn money and eventually buy land. Another early settler in Ottawa County is a man by the name of Isaac Bird. And when you look at the census records, you'll see their names spelled different ways. So usually we keep both spellings because we saw it spelled two different ways. Now he was actually born in Virginia. We know this. There's no other reference to any place else for Isaac Bird. He was born in slavery in 1845. Now this is part of his story that he tells, that he was forced to serve in the Confederate Army. So the Confederate Army musters about 1861, 1862. So he's being forced to serve in the Civil War on the side of the South. And a lot of African Americans were forced to serve their masters in the Confederate military. They were not soldiers. They were not enlisted men, but they were taken by their masters with them, and they may have groomed the horses or served as personal valets or dug trenches or things like that. So this is part of his story. While he was working with the Confederate Army, he escaped, and he made his way to Michigan, where he worked as a ship steward and a cook. So here's a connection. Here's an African American who's working on a ship that comes into Ottawa County. He might be one of the links. I don't know if that ship goes to Chicago or if it goes up and around and ends up in Detroit. But if he's working on that ship, he's going to make contact at a lot of points along the Great Lakes. And depending on his relationship with the captain of that ship, he might be able to get some stowaways on board and bring them back. Mm-hmm.
Is the name of the ship known?
At this point, we don't know which ship he worked on, but that kind of information we can find out, because the records of those ships should be available at the regional library in Chicago. So we can find out which ship he might have worked on because he obviously had an important job. The cook on a ship is a very important job. So I would think that some record would list him. However, if they knew that he was a former slave and that he had run away, they might not record him. So it's very difficult to find African Americans when you go back before the Civil War, because they do kind of shift things around, trying not to be found. Now, Grand Haven was a very busy place in the 1850s. This article comes from the Grand Haven newspaper of July 1857, and it talks about some of the boats that traversed Lake Michigan and came into Grand Haven. Here's one boat called the Olive Branch, and the captain of that boat is Captain Shoemaker. And apparently this person was on the boat, and they were looking out at what they saw as they were coming up the lake in Ottawa County. And they talk about, we passed by several flourishing villages: Granville, Lamont, Eastmanville, Ottawa, Center, Crockery Creek, Mill Point, and Ferrysburg. And it says, Grand Haven is all astir now and seems to be quite a driving place. They have 2 churches, Presbyterians and Dutch, 2 hotels, 8 groggeries. How come they have more groggeries than churches? A bowling saloon, a billiard saloon, several gambling establishments. Can you believe? I guess all this river activity, you're going to get some gamblers, right? 2 sawmills, a steam, I can't read that very well, a printing office, etc., etc. And then down here, they talk about these do not enhance the villages of the town. No, do not embrace those of all the villages of, I don't know what that is, but these are villages that surround Grand Haven. Here's Ferrysburg, Mill Point, Africa, and something, Nortonville. But here is a place called Africa. Usually, when you have a place with that name, it's named that because black people are living there. Sometimes we have a place called Egypt or someplace like that. So I'm thinking that this probably is the area where a lot of the African Americans were living in Spring Lake Township. And it's very rare to see that word in print. But every now and then you'll come across people using terms like that. Now these are 2 other early newspaper articles. This one is from 1857, the Grand Rapids Eagle. And it says, a passenger by the Underground Railway from Missouri passed through Grand Haven the week before last. He had escaped from a southern Missouri plantation where there are some 500 other chattels. He had arrived at Milwaukee, but 2 hours after some kind of journey of several weeks through town, where he was informed that his masters were in Milwaukee. He immediately embarked on board a brig which was bound for this port. So this port is Grand Haven. So there obviously were ship captains who would take African Americans who were escaping on their ships and bring them to Grand Haven. The fugitive, it says, on board a brig which was bound for this port, but the wind took it into the White River. So the White River must have been, you know the area. You know how close the White River is to the Grand Haven port. Probably 25 miles. You have to know geography very well to do this research. And I have to actually go there to see it. But anyway, it says the fugitive walked to Grand Haven from the White River area, where he was kindly received and some substantial aid given him. The next day, he went up by one of the river boats to Grand Rapids. Some of the passengers had heard, and the captain raised a suit of clothes and $7 in cash, and he was furnished with the best directions to the Canada shore, where he arrived safely. The fugitive was rather lame in one limb from being struck by his overseer. The blow was aimed at his head, but he dodged on one side and whatever, anyway, he was hit in the leg or something, and that caused him to be a little lame. So not only did he arrive in the White River, he was given assistance by people in Grand Haven. And they put him on board another vessel that went to Grand Rapids. So it's interesting that these old articles do not give any names. If we just had one name, we could probably solve the puzzle. But apparently, people in Grand Haven were willing, number one, to let fugitives aboard their ships, which was against the law, was definitely against the law to transport a fugitive anywhere. And they also, once he got off the boat, gave him money, gave him clothes, and helped him get another passage on to Grand Rapids. So this lets us know that there was definitely Underground Railroad activity in this area coming on the lake.